Hello everybody, my name is Daulton, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Dark Souls 3, the Fire Fades edition for the PS4. Dark Souls 3 is developed by FromSoftware, the same company that brought you the Armored Core series, Metal Wolf Chaos, and the previous Dark Souls games. The game was published by Bandai Namco Entertainment, and it was directed by all of the Souls directors thus far, including series creator Hidetaka Miyazaki. It's been a while, hasn't it? And that's because I've been playing the very difficult but very fun Dark Souls 3. Previously, I had played Dark Souls 2 2 years ago on the Xbox 360, and then I played Bloodborne last year on the PS4. I liked Dark Souls 2 for its varied environments and combination of RPG and combat-focused mechanics. Meanwhile, I liked Bloodborne for its unique macabre-influenced settings, as well as its emphasis on combat. Going off my previous two positive experiences with the Soulsborne franchise, I was also going into Dark Souls 3 expecting to have a good time. I was also interested to play Dark Souls 3 here, given that any Souls games that comes after this one will be heading in a different direction according to FromSoftware. So starting off with the things I liked about Dark Souls 3, I really liked how they replaced the humanity mechanics with the Ember mechanics in this game. In previous installments, whenever a player would die, they would lose a little bit of their maximum health until it reached a certain minimum. And the only way to get that maximum health back was to consume humanities. But in this game, all you have to do is consume an ember, and it replenishes right away. If you die, you don't lose any maximum health whatsoever, except for the initial time you die after you have an ember. I also like the two-part boss fights that this game had. Every boss in this game has two states that they can be in. The initial state will prove easier for players, and then once their health is either chopped in half or they have been beaten once, then they will then go into their second state, being a harder version of that boss. I like this because it provided variety, and kept me on my toes when I was facing these bosses. I also liked the linear game progression within Dark Souls 3. In the previous two games, the environments within those games felt a lot more maze-like, while in this game, the levels were laid out as if they were a straight line, and within the middle of that line, there were some paths broken off that you can twist and turn into, but no matter what path you took, you would always end up at the same ending point. Finally, I liked the playthrough variety in this game. In this game, there are about 40 different unique weapons that you can get throughout a playthrough. And I'm going to guess that there are at least 20 different playstyles that those weapons give the player to try out. You have things like thrusting swords, broadswords, magic, curses, and other such types of combat. This, accompanied with the normally hidden pathways and items within a Dark Souls game, really allows for the player to play through the game again and get a different experience. I really like that. Now, in terms of the negatives of Dark Souls 3, I thought that the environments were pretty bland looking in this game. The only environment that I really liked was the city of Irithyll, which had this very nice, wintry, shimmery look to it. Everything else had this bland, brown color grading that just looked boring and drab. I also think Dark Souls 3 goes on a little bit too long. The time it took me to beat this game is around 73 hours. And so with a game as long as that, it needs to be interesting throughout, or else the player is going to get bored at some point. And that's what Dark Souls 3 suffers from here. I'd say Dark Souls 3 loses steam around the 2/3 part, when they are teleported back to Lothric in order to fight the Boreal Valley Dancer. Because from that point on, you stay in the brown drab Lothric while fighting enemy types that you had already fought in the beginning of the game. Thus, things stop feeling fresh and interesting. Also, if you remember back in the beginning of this review, I mentioned that I had played Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, but I did not mention that I had played Dark Souls the original, and that's because I have not. However, I heard from a friend that this game likes to borrow a lot of ideas from that initial Dark Souls game and put it here into Dark Souls 3. And looking up a couple of videos, I can definitely see where he was coming from. There are a lot of reused enemy types from that game, as well as reused environments, and even reused music themes. I get why they're kind of doing it, because it's supposed to close off this chapter of Dark Souls, where the Dark Souls games past this will be in an entirely new direction. However, I imagine for people who have stuck with this series since the beginning, they might come into this a little disappointed that there isn't as much new stuff as they might want within this game. I also didn't like how locking on acted in this game, where it and the camera correction is binded to the right stick. You can also only lock on to enemies if you are looking right at them. So if you're not looking at an enemy in the right way that the game wants you to, you will instead click this stick and your camera will correct to where your character's back is and might bring that enemy that you were trying to lock onto out of the frame. This definitely lended to some frustrating moments in Dark Souls 3 at times. There are also visual glitches within Dark Souls 3. You're mostly going to see them within closed-off environments like sewers or tunnels, where it seems like they use the same rendering technique that Forsaken 64 was using as well, where chunks of the map will render within the player's peripheral vision, and you'll see like a black square within a split second before it disappears into that chunk that should be loaded. There were also some muddy textures that were appearing for a split second as well. Finally, I thought there was an inconsistency on boss difficulty. There were some bosses in the end game that were really easy, while there were some bosses in the beginning of the game that were a lot harder. For example, I think Pontiff Sullivan should have been like the last boss of this game, because the final boss of Dark Souls 3 isn't as hard as you think he might be. There are also bosses that are easy to fight but have a high damage output, and thus the difficulty with those bosses just feel more fabricated. But I'd say overall, for the majority of my playthrough, I really enjoyed playing through Dark Souls 3. I think it's a great addition to this chapter of Dark Souls, and I'm interested to see where they go with this, quote, new direction, unquote. I'm going to give Dark Souls 3 a final score of an 8 out of 10. I think things like the bland environments, the camera locking on, the inconsistency on boss difficulty, and the visual glitches hampered this game to a point, in my opinion. That concludes my review for Dark Souls 3. I'm sorry if it's a little short. I'm suffering from a cold right now, so I can't talk much. If you like my reviews, please like, comment, and subscribe. I also have social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online portfolios where you can see game design works that I have done. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.